Furthermore, I believe that suburbia must be destroyed. So how did we get to this point? How did we get to the point where, bizarrely, we have left-wing accounts promoting traditional urbanism and right-wing accounts going against it? It's basically the inverse of what we had back in the glory days of the alt-right back in 2016, 2015, 2017, back when we were more of a genuinely third positionist movement. Nowadays, the alt-right has gone full libertarian, full individualist, full Ameritard, and is basically taken on the role of staunchly defending suburbia. And you can see this lately with this new Stone Toss comic that I'll link to here, but also it's just been everywhere. Like lately, everybody's been posting these pro-suburbia memes in the reactosphere, whatever the fuck you want to call it, whereas some of the leftists are actually, bizarrely enough, promoting memes, spreading memes. They're posting memes promoting traditional architecture and traditionally designed cities. It is a real fucking inversion of what we used to have, and it's frankly insane that this is happening, but that is actually the case lately. Basically, with leftists, it seems like, aside from statues, like they are very much against any kind of statues or any depiction of the human form if it's a white person. But aside from that, they seem to be actually less against traditional architectural patterns than right-wingers are, because right-wingers have basically demanded that all forms of pre-World War II cities must be abolished. And their defenses of suburbia, quite frankly, they're addressing the symptoms and not the cause of the problem. I'm going to get into that. Basically, suburbia is not analogous to whites. Suburbia is actually analogous to Jews, because the thing is about suburbia is that it is inherently parasitic. Cities can exist without the suburbs, but suburbs cannot exist without the cities. And when I say suburbs, I mean the North American conception of suburbia, low-density, car-dependent sprawl. Now, why is it analogous to Jews? Because essentially what suburbia does is it parasites off the cities while actually not contributing as much in return, because there have been a lot of analyses of the costs of suburbia in terms of the amount of money per acre, and suburbia is actually extremely expensive because it requires the infrastructure to sprawl on basically for miles and miles, and you don't actually get as much value per acre. And what that means is that essentially suburbs are a net drain of public money, and they're actually a Ponzi scheme, and the only way they are profitable is by continuing to build on and on and on, kind of like a spreading cancer. That's basically what suburbs are. They are the development form of cancer. But when I say that they're analogous to Jews, I go beyond that. They're analogous because by nature they destroy the traditional. Suburbs flourish because they destroy the cities. And how they destroy the cities is, firstly, they rebuild the cities in their image by tearing down old neighborhoods and replacing them with freeways so the suburbanites can get into the city for their downtown core jobs more easily. And they also tear down historic parts of the city for the sake of parking. Now, admittedly, this isn't being done now as much as it was being done back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, but the damage is already largely done in many cities, and many of these cities will likely never recover unless drastic reforms are made. And this hollowing out of the cities is a big reason why so many of these cities have become emptying, decrepit shitholes these days, especially in the Midwest, like the Rust Belt. Pretty much every major city in the Midwest, with the exception of Chicago, has had this happen. And a lot of cities in other parts of the U.S., like the South, the Inland West, and in Canada too, to a lesser extent, but still to some extent in Canada. I don't know to what extent this process has happened in Australia or New Zealand. I'm not as familiar with these regions, but it wouldn't surprise me if at least some similar things have happened. So that's one aspect of how the suburbs parasite off the cities. But there's another aspect that I think doesn't get as much attention, which is when people talk about what the problems of the cities are, the homeless problem, the mentally ill, drug addiction problem, all these things, like that has been a huge problem in cities lately. I'm not denying it. Like there's been a massive increase in the number of homeless people, mentally ill people, drug users, and those sorts of people. I don't deny that this is a growing problem in cities. It's a legitimate concern. It's a legitimate safety threat, even though there are legitimate safety threats in suburbia that people ignore, such as car accidents and obesity, which are two of the leading premature causes of death and are exacerbated by the suburban lifestyle. But nevertheless, this is a legitimate problem in cities, the problem of homeless, mentally ill, drug-addicted people who will attack or just make people uncomfortable. And to be fair, I have never been attacked by one of these people, but a lot of people have. And I mean, part of the reason I think they see me and they see me as somebody who's maybe looks kind of unfriendly. So I don't think they are as inclined to fuck with me because, I don't know, maybe they just don't see me as somebody who would be easy to fuck with. Even though I'm not particularly physically intimidating, maybe I look like the kind of person who, like, yeah, I'm not physically intimidating, but like I might be crazy enough that they don't want to fuck with me. You know, maybe crazy recognizes crazy to a degree. I don't know. It takes one to know one, I suppose. Regardless, I digress. Even if I haven't been fucked with by these people directly, like I've stepped in human shit, which is disgusting, but I've never had them attack me before or scream directly at me personally before. But nonetheless, I get people have had these experiences, and I get that it can be uncomfortable and traumatizing, and I understand why people don't want to be around it. But we really have to ask the question in the first place, why are all these people in the cities rather than in the suburbs? And I think it's a very important question to ask, because it's really the same as asking why are all these migrants in Europe and not in Israel? Because Israel kicks them out and sends them to Europe. It's the same thing the suburbs do. These homeless people, I've seen them try to set up in the suburbs, and it never ends well for them. In the suburb where my parents live, there's this homeless guy who would go around on his bike trying to collect waste, like recycled alcohol bottles and stuff like that. And you know what happened to him? He got yelled at really harshly by some of the garbage men there. Like, oh, you're fucking stealing there, eh? Oh, that's stealing. That's theft, eh? Don't fucking do that, eh? We're gonna call the cops on you, eh? And I'm thinking, I bet you anything these garbage men live in this neighborhood. And the reason they're doing this is because they feel that these homeless people don't belong here. They belong in the city. And that's kind of the attitude of suburbanites, is like they really do not tolerate these homeless people, drug addicted people, mentally ill people in their vicinity. And that's why the homeless are all in the city to begin with, is because the suburbanites have absolutely no tolerance for them. And they basically thrust this problem onto the cities in the same way that Israel fucking thrusts the immigration problem onto Europe. It's really quite analogous. Like the reason why there's no homeless in the suburbs is because the suburbanites push them onto the city. And people might say, well, homeless people don't want to live in the suburbs. It's like, is that true though? Because I think from a homeless person's perspective, I think a lot of them might be attracted to the suburbs for the very same reason that people in homes are attracted to the suburbs. They might want to get away from other homeless people, and they might know, oh, there's a lower population density of homeless people out in the suburbs. This is a fucking paradise, you know? I can set my tent up in one of the local parks, one of the local hiking trails or forests, and there won't be any other homeless people nearby. Oh, this is an absolute paradise. It's close enough to civilization that I can still, you know, beg and scrounge off the scraps and whatever, but far enough away from other homeless that I don't have to worry about them as much. Like, honestly, from a homeless perspective, there'd be plenty of advantages to living in the suburbs. It's, again, the same things that draw other people to the suburbs. You know, the desire to be sort of in civilization partially, but not fully. Like, to be around people, but not too close to people. Like, the same reasons why other people want to go to the suburbs might draw homeless people there. And to be honest, I have seen a few select cases of homeless people trying to set up camp in the suburbs, but my guess is they get evicted really quickly because I never see them there for long. So, and when they do, they usually go to certain specific places, either abandoned houses, the sides of freeways, very deep into forested areas. And sometimes I see them begging at freeway off-ramps, but they don't seem to live there. They don't seem to have their tents set up there. So when you do occasionally get homeless people in suburbs, it seems to be those specific places, and they don't seem to stay there as long because they seem to get evicted as soon as they get caught. The only place where I've seen them set up and not be immediately evicted is by the side of freeways, and those are few and far between. So I guess that they probably do get evicted too. But I strongly dispute the assertion that the only reason there aren't homeless in the suburbs is because they have no desire to be there. I strongly doubt that because I know suburbanites. I've grown up in the suburbs. I know how they are, and they do not tolerate that shit. They are very, very strongly NIMBY. And if they won't tolerate high density housing, you can be damn sure they won't tolerate homelessness. So this idea that like the cities are shitholes because of all the homeless and drug addicts, I don't dispute that. But my question is, okay, but why are they all in the cities? Because the suburbs won't tolerate them in the same way Jews don't tolerate these problems in their neighborhoods, or in a broader sense in Israel, and they push them onto the white population. So really, suburbs are not implicitly white, they're implicitly Jewish. And I mean, I could go to the fact that like Levittown, the first prototypical American suburb, was founded by a Jewish guy by the name of Levitt, but I mean, I don't even need to go that far back. I just need to analyze basic behavioral cultural patterns. And that seems to be what's going on there, because frankly, this idea that like all these drug addicted people are a problem that cities create, they're not a problem that cities create. They're a problem that gets pushed onto cities because the people in cities are the ones who are willing to put up with it. But like, if you look at where these people come from originally, a lot of them come from all over the place. Like, some of them come from small towns and move into the cities to be homeless there because they find it easier in the cities. I'm sure some of them probably originated from the suburbs. I would not be surprised if at least a few of these drug addicted people grew up in the suburbs like I did. Like, it wouldn't shock me one bit. So like, I mean, it is a case where, again, a lot of these suburbs, they vote for parties that exacerbate the homeless crisis. They vote for policies that exacerbate it, but they just don't want it in their own backyard. They want it in the backyards of the urbanites. So they essentially make it someone else's problem, even though they contribute toward exacerbating the problem. So like, at the end of the day, suburbia is parasitic. Crush the suburbanite. That's all I have to say. Oh, and one more thing is an addendum. The whole racial aspect of it, like, let's be honest. These days, maybe it's different in America, but in Canada, a lot of these homeless, mentally ill, drug-addicted people, a lot of them are white. So this isn't a problem that just exists because of immigration, but regardless, even if it was, the point is, a lot of these suburbanites, they vote for more immigration. They just don't want these problems in their own backyards, and it's really hypocritical. They want more, like, they're fine with, like, immigration as long as you're like a wealthy upper middle class immigrant. They like this, it's not really about race to most suburbanites. It's more just about they don't want poor people, they don't want homeless people. And also this idea that suburbia is implicitly white, like demographically it's not always true. I actually looked up the data, and there's a number of major cities in North America where the core city is actually whiter on average than the suburbs in terms of the population, like per capita, the overall percentage who's white. Toronto, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, Charleston, South Carolina. In all those cases, the core city is actually whiter than the suburbs on average. And it's very close in San Francisco, San Diego, and and Washington, D.C. So this idea that like being pro-suburban means being pro-white, it's not entirely true. Never mind that you're like shitting on traditional white architecture, you're shitting on traditional white communities, like you're shitting on the places where the majority of our traditional architecture, at least here in North America, still exists. Never mind that, it's also not even demographically the case in many places anymore. So, yeah. That's I think all I have to say about that.